Welcome to the first edition of the Stray and Hammy podcast. It's March 11th, 2013. My name is Mark.
I'm Rex.
And I am Travis Cavall.
This week we're going to talk about Nolan Ryan and John Daniels, the Cowboys' off-season progress thus far and where we think they should go from here. And we'll wrap up with a discussion on where the Stars stand at the midpoint of the season. All right, so it took a week or so, but Nolan Ryan finally spoke on the matter of his role with the Rangers. But, you know, as we suspected, he didn't really say much, really. Here's his statement in full. Over the last week, Ray Davis, Bob Simpson, and I have been in discussion and met in person. The conversations have been productive, and we have discussed my role as CEO of the organization. We agreed these discussions will continue as we go forward. And that was pretty much it. You know, basically what he's saying is we've talked, and I'm still not happy. We're going to keep talking, though. So that's just
a nice way of saying I'm really on my way out, but I want to hold a nice public appearance.
I disagree completely. I feel like the whole time we've been going through this, Nolan came out immediately, congratulate John Daniels and Rick George. Then, like, he's probably a little bummed, and he goes into his shell. Then John Daniels comes out, says, hey, Nolan's the CEO, I still report to Nolan. Bob Simpson comes out, says, Nolan's still the CEO, everybody still reports to Nolan. And Nolan comes out today, and everybody's trying to make his statement hieroglyphics and say, well, he didn't say anything because he's really a calculating guy. I feel like Nolan Ryan is super boring as an individual.
Except when he's chasing snow monkeys.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. But like the snow monkey story, a lot of what he says doesn't always make sense unless he's talking about being awesome at throwing fastballs. So I'm really not that worried about it. Do I think Nolan Ryan's going to leave the Rangers at some point? Yes. Do I think he'll go through his 3-year contract? Not necessarily, but I think at the end of this season, Nolan Ryan will be a member of the Texas Rangers.
Yeah. But throughout the whole season?
Throughout the entire season.
I could agree with that, but I think the cards are on the table that it's adding up for him to be on his way out. And like you said, not necessarily fulfilling his full contract.
Yeah, but he's old.
He's not that old.
He's old enough, man.
66.
66, the average.
Heart issues.
Yeah, the average span of life.
He could still throw 90 miles an hour.
I think it's 80.
He's not that old. So, I understand your point, and I think there's some truth to that. I just, time and time again, you see somebody comes out and makes a statement that everything's peachy, I'm still in this position, everybody's still going to report to me, or whatever the case is. And then no doubt 70% of the time that person is gone before the end of the season. Whatever position is in whatever sport. So my thing is, let's just keep going with the trend and say, if they say that nothing's wrong, something's probably wrong. So, yeah, I don't really have any hard background. I wasn't in the meeting with Nolan and JD and, all those guys. But I'm just going based on past perception of what the public thinks versus what really ends up happening. Your word.
Yeah, fix his own car on the side of the road. But so I don't see the teenage hurt feelings as much as they are. I think what happened is maybe he was a little more taken aback by it than he thought he would be when it got announced. So he's like, okay, now instead of having signed off on a smaller role, I publicly have a smaller role. And now I've got to swallow my pride a little bit. So maybe that's tough for him. Maybe he goes into a shell. And then, maybe a way, way, way underling on JD's side is doing a little too much celebrating, and it makes some guy that's, Nolan's driver angry, and then Randy Galloway gets a hold of that guy. And so it turns into a big everybody's mad thing, but all Nolan really needed was the ego stroke of the owner taking him to dinner at Del Frisco's, cheap Mexican, and saying, everything's still good, buddy.
Yeah.
Well, I think what Ryan brought to Rangers is appreciated. Mm-hmm. But I think the bigger picture is what's JD bring to the table, and is he capable at not even 40 years old being a CEO of a baseball club? And I think the answer is yes. I love Nolan Ryan as an addition to the Rangers. I loved him when he was here. I love the things that happened. I loved his role as CEO. But I really think JD's that guy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you could say John Daniels is going to be your CEO, your president of business operations or baseball operations for hopefully the next 20 years, I'm in.
Yeah.
I mean,
I just want to see it play out. Honestly, I want to see it play out as far as the next. And I actually hope Nolan would stay his entire contract, but I would like to see the next 2 or 3 years with Nolan around, with JD around, obviously, and his guys. If you could keep them all, and obviously, I'm not for keeping Nolan at the expense of Dad Levine and AJ Preller. If it's an either or thing, and Ron Washington, I want JD to be the CEO and overriding factor of the Texas Rangers in the in the Profar era with the next manager.
Yeah.
Honestly, I want him to have his entire stamp at that time.
Yeah. I mean, if it comes down, like you were saying, if it's an either or, I think we all, tepidly agree that we'd take JD. And it's not really even about JD. It's about JD and his guys, the organization that he's built up. So as much as I appreciate, Ryan's what he's brought to the club, he lended an air of authority to the club that the club was really lacking when he joined it in 2008. But JD has built something here, and I think this move is truly about keeping JD here, and I think that's something that's kind of widely accepted now. The story that's been playing out in some media places has been that it's been like an old school versus new school kind of thing, where JD is this guy that only relies on stats, only doesn't take into account scouting and the old way of things, and that's just one thing that I think we all want to clear the air on and make sure everybody knows that's absolutely freaking false, as Norm would say. And we've got a couple quotes here from Jamie Newberg's ebook on John Daniels. This is from John Hart, the former Rangers GM. He says, "I would suggest JD has more of a 60-40 lean in favor of scouting, depending on the scout, the depth of the report, and so on. It's certainly a balance, but JD has great confidence in the eyes and experience of the scout and the ultimate report on the player." And this is from Daniels himself. He says, "The use of statistics in the decision-making process is nothing new. Personally, I believe that there's a blend between scouting and the analytical perspectives." So it's not that JD only looks at stats. It's certainly a big part of how he looks at things, and it should be. That's not something that should be ignored, but he certainly relies on his stats. AJ Preller, his senior director of player personnel, said, "Everybody wants to pigeonhole executives, you're a scouting guy or a stat guy." But Preller said, "The bottom line is JD has such a good feel for it. Scouting is the most important piece of the puzzle, and he'll fill in with the stats."
I think all of that is, you can say he's a stat guy, but it's all, it displays itself in his scout, what's going on with the scouting. I mean, the minor league, the farm system of the Rangers has been, since JD took over, has propelled to being the top farm system for years in a row. Mm-hmm. And I think this year they're, again, among the top. If not the top, they're in the top 3. Yeah. And so that's not something that you just throw out Oakland Moneyball stuff of the 90s, because that was strictly based on stats. Mm-hmm. Had nothing to do with, can this guy play ball? Is his OBP a certain number? And if so, and we can pay him $400,000 a year and fit him into that spot. Yeah. So it's not, what JD's doing is not based on that. And you can see it with the guys that are coming up, where they have, the top 10 Rangers prospects are all in the top 100 in all of baseball, or something like that. So that doesn't happen just by looking at a stat and saying, yeah, that guy can play. Yeah, it's scouting.
Yeah, there are no scouts. There really are no stats for guys who are drafted in high school, really, that are applicable to saying, can they play in the major leagues? So especially in the draft, they're definitely relying on scouting reports. Now, when you're evaluating players at the major league level, I think that's where stats do come into play a little bit more because those players do have a history, and I think Daniels excels in that area. Everybody was saying, "Oh, Adrian Beltre is a contract year player." No, he's not, and we JD and his guys figured that out.
Many Golden Gloves in one year.
Yeah.
Yeah, you meant his offensive production, I think, but. I agree, and one of the things that impressed me most about John Daniels during this whole Nolan Ryan situation is when he said, I still report to Nolan he could technically veto me on something, but I don't think he ever would. Just like when our guys run the draft room, I can veto any pick they want to make, but I let them do their jobs. I think he does a really good job of, and I think this is the mark of any great leader, any great head of any organization is hire the right guys, hire guys you trust that know what they're doing, and then trust those guys to make the decisions. So I think a Billy Beane looks at just numbers because he trusts a spreadsheet. He trusts things he can physically see, whereas JD is more apt to take a report of some guy in the Dominican Republic and give a guy $15.5 million.
And now, based on analysis, not on stats. And you guys know I'm a stats guy, and one of the things I'd mentioned to Travis earlier, and it's a stat that I think is probably the most telling against the JD as a stats guy, is you look at the production that he's gotten out of his payroll, and last year's payroll was the sixth highest payroll at $120 million in all baseball. And that was with Hamilton. So, that's off the books now. And now we've got some other guys that make up a little bit. But you get the point. It's about the same this year.
Michael Young's off the books now.
Yeah, so...
Thank you.
Most of Michael
But
Young.
Pretty much.
Here's the contradiction to that stat. Sixth highest, but they have the highest median pay. And the median, as you guys are going back to your ninth grade geometry or whatever algebra classes, that's the middle number. The highest median number, meaning from top to bottom, all their players get paid well and they perform well.
Yeah.
I mean, we have one of the toughest lineups on the Rangers, and the pitching's obviously come around. So even the Yankees that have these ridiculous top-end salaries, their median average, the guy in the middle of their salary makes 1/3 of the median guy on the Rangers. Meaning, from top to bottom, the talent on the Rangers is good. That's scouting.
Yeah.
And they get paid well. Mm-hmm. They're not cheap like Moneyball. They get paid to perform, and they were scouted well enough to do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, to circle this back to Nolan Ryan just a little bit, if they are truly keeping the same sort of system where JD does somewhat report to Ryan, where Ryan does have sort of the final say he takes to the owners, how do you guys feel about that aspect of it? Should Nolan still have the final say if JD is the director of baseball operations?
I think if it works the same way it's worked in the past, where I think the rumor is that Nolan wasn't 100% bought in on Darvish.
Yeah.
When it first came out, and so JD went and said, "Hey, this is where we need to allocate our free agent pitching money," and Nolan was like, well, "CJ Wilson's right here, though," and he did pretty good last year. and JD was like, "Not so much CJ. This is our guy," and he said to JD basically, "You've done a good enough job selling me. I don't necessarily buy into it. You make the presentation to Simpson and what's the other guy's name?
Ray Davis.
Yeah. And he went and did that. They got you Darvish. So if he's, and I don't know why he wouldn't be, especially now with quote unquote reduced power, if he's not just bullheaded stubborn and willing to listen to, willing to put the right guys in place and trust those guys, and even when he doesn't necessarily agree, give them their opportunity to present to ownership, I don't think it's a problem.
No, I don't either. I think it'll continue to work as long as Nolan's around. He's a baseball guy, but as far as I can tell in his career and as a pitcher and in the executive suites, he's realistic when it comes to baseball, and he understands that JD knows his job and he does it well and he trusts his word. Like you said, he was convinced about or persuaded enough in JD's analysis of Yu Darvish to say, whatever you want, let's roll with it. I may not be on board, but let's roll with it.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, it's going to work. He puts faith in the guys, JD and his crew, and says, I'm going to provide feedback. See, this is one thing the Cowboys don't have with Jerry Jones. It's all Jerry Jones feedback. Nolan Ryan says, I'll give you my feedback, but ultimately, I trust you guys.
Yeah. JD said as much. He said the players in the system have done the convincing. When he saw Holland, Feliz, and others on the backfields, that was effectively our resume, and that started to build a professional respect. So I think that respect has built up over the years since they've got together and started working professionally together in 2008. All right, when we come back, we'll take a look at what the Cowboys have done thus far in the offseason and what their options are in the upcoming NFL draft.
Welcome back to the Strain Hammy podcast. This segment, we're going to be discussing the Cowboys, a little bit on their offseason moves and really hitting up their draft. Let's just start at it. I think a couple things need to happen before we get to the draft. Romo's contract is going to get redone. I think we're in the same ballpark. Travis and I have discussed it, and I think Mark maybe is probably on board. We're both in the ballpark of $13 million a year, 3 to 4 years. I think it's going to happen. It's got to happen for cap room for the draft. I mean, you got to sign your draft picks. Is there any disagreement or any other talking point there?
No. My only thing is if he wants $17 million a year or he wants 5 years at $13 a year, I'm out.
Just let him finish out his contract and
absolutely
move on.
One, because I think he wants to be a Cowboys quarterback. So I think a year away from the Flacco deal, things may settle down a little bit quarterback-wise. And I think a 3-year extension at around $13.5 a year, even if you want to make it all guaranteed like Brady's deal, I'm fine with that, but I don't want to sign up for a 37-year-old Tony Romo at all.
I agree. Next was Spencer. They franchise tagged him, and he's going to count $10.5 million to the salary cap this year. But there's some potential that they can get from. They can restructure that, or not restructure, re-sign him to a longer-term deal that's more cap-friendly, hopefully in the neighborhood of $7 million a year. They could trade him and get something for him, a pick. Who knows what value it'd have, second or third most likely. Or they could just let him play 1 year and let him go. I think personally it was a good move because all of those outcomes are potentially good. Even if he plays 1 year at $10.5 million and performs well, it's another contract year. He's playing for more money, and
it buys you another draft to fill the spot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good move, and I don't think the $10.5 million this year really hurts them. They were under the cap in order to do it by the deadline today, so certainly, I don't think it hurt them in any way. I'm good with it. I'm on board with it. I think they should have worked into a long-term deal last year, and I was on board with that before he had 11 sacks, but
maybe it didn't happen. Cheaper, yeah.
Yeah. So
my thing with Spencer is I think we have kind of the same reservations about him maybe being too small to play the position.
In the 4-3.
Yeah, in the 4-3. And also, the guy's had big sack numbers once. We've kind of talked about it a couple of times. Everybody makes a big deal about his quarterback pressures and everybody loves quarterback pressures now because it's next level sack. But to me, sacks and pressures are not the same things because sacks shut down drives and pressures.
You told me this the other day. When is it a sack? Do you remember? When the quarterback's on the ground.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's when it counts. That's when the pressure counts. And I agree wholeheartedly.
Because quarterbacks can throw for touchdowns under pressure. Quarterbacks don't throw for touchdowns when they're on their back. And those 10-yard losses, much like holding penalties or offsides penalties, the majority of the time in drives.
Yep.
And so it's basically taking a scoring opportunity away from the other team. And Spencer doesn't do that for his career often enough. Now, he may, last year may be a projection of what the rest of his career is going to be, I tend to think you come back down to what you are. And if you're asked to play a more physical position as a smaller guy. And so I know that both of you think I'm the biggest homer in the world for this guy, but I want to ask you both, do you know for a fact that Anthony Spencer will play the strong side in position better than Jason Hatcher next year?
No, you don't. And that's why I'm glad they haven't actually stepped out yet and extended him to a long contract. This franchise tag kind of gives you 1 year to kind of see where he's at. Can he play this position?
I told Travis probably when they announced the hiring of Monty Kiffin that I thought Spencer was the better Sam linebacker in the 4-3 because he's only 240 pounds. You do have Jason Hatcher to play the end spot over there, and you would end up with Hatcher and Spencer on the same side. And I think, give me a team that's going to try to run on that. And there's not going to be many that will be doing it very well to that side. So that was Spencer's, 250. Mm-hmm. Hatcher's 299, 300.
Yeah.
Ware's 255. So you're talking about small ends with Spencer and Ware in terms of NFL defensive linemen. Dwight Freeney was small, but he was 270 pounds small. He was 6'1", but he was 270 pounds, so he's not small. These guys are lightweight compared to him, but they're also extremely athletic and extremely strong guys. They're both 6'4", 6'5", so they can hold up against these 6'6", 320-pound linemen because they're going to be using their athleticism to get around them. However, I still think Spencer's the better strong side linebacker, and they're never going to play him there.
I disagree for two reasons. I get your thinking in the fact that first down, Spencer's at Sam linebacker. He's fast enough to set the edge from that position, and you can't run on the Cowboys at that point. And I think you're absolutely right. My problem is you line up Tony Gonzalez on that side, and he gets in a situation where he's got to cover him one-on-one on a seam. I don't like it.
Yeah, and he's lost in coverage, I'll admit.
He can cover okay for a 3-4 outside linebacker when it's a disguised coverage. He does an okay job, but and that's a lot of the people said, he doesn't get sacks. A lot of it was because he was dropping more in previous years, but I don't trust him in coverage as a Sam linebacker.
And to that point, he's not going to play there. They're going to have him as a defensive end. The idea with Hatcher is if they do work out a trade or no long-term deal, Hatcher steps in and plays that spot, or somebody that they draft certainly steps in and plays that spot when Spencer's gone. So I don't think, as far as how that defensive end position is going to be handled this year, I don't think we'll have any beef with if it's either Hatcher, Spencer, or a drafted kid. I think the guys that they're going to have in there, we're all going to be pleased with as long as Spencer plays like he had last year.
Yeah, I think I come off wrong sometimes. I like Spencer. I think he's a good option there. I don't feel great about $9 million a year if that ends up being the number for 4 or 5 years. I feel okay $6 or $7 million. I think we were in the same salary range. But if he asks for $9 a year, you can't sign him long term.
And so if they don't,
then
you go to the draft. And you start thinking, when are you going to get a guy that is either going to be Spencer's replacement, or where do you go in the other round? So let's go first round, and we'll work our way through it. We'll talk about guys that we think will be there, and then guys you think, if you could pick anybody at that position, who you're going to take. So my first round pick, I got one guy on the board that I'm taking. It's Jonathan Cooper. He's 6'3", 310. He's the most athletic guard in the draft. Which is exactly what the Cowboys need. He would be a day one starter. I think, as much as I don't want to say it, between Livings and Bernardo, Livings is going to be the guy that's going to retain his starting job. Which
there's no doubt,
blows the heck out of me because both of them had terrible years. But Bernardo's a versatile guy. He can play center and guard, and so I think you'll look for him there. So you draft Cooper, he's your starting right guard.
Yeah, and if Bernardo does go inside, you at least have a guy that's healthy at center, and you have a huge offensive line again. You have a big body of mass. But I like Cooper. The only thing that worries me about him, not necessarily a dominant player before his senior year, but then was really dominant his senior year, like up for all the Outland trophies and all that. So I agree he's better than anything you got. He's better than Livings. He's better than Bernardo. He's better than Costa. He's better than everybody on the roster. So
Kowalski, Cook.
Yeah, none of those guys matter. Please don't say Kevin Kowalski to me.
He's on the roster.
Yeah. But I agree with you. My bigger beef with the Cowboys offensive line is with Doug Free. So if something happened and if Lane Johnson went out and partied too hard 2 weeks before the draft and got found in a puddle outside of a bar, I would be very happy. And if he would fall to the Cowboys, that would be my dream pick no matter what happened, as long as it's not heroin with Josh Hamilton in California somewhere. I would love that, and literally anything to get Doug Free off the field, that's what I want.
And that would be my second scenario is I think there's 3 positions they draft in the first round. Tackle, and it's to be the starting right tackle. Guard, to be the starting right guard. And if neither of the 2 guys you have targeted, which are probably Lane Johnson and Jonathan Cooper, or Chance Warmack could be another guard, the kid from Alabama.
That's another guy who's got to fall a little bit, though.
Yeah, he would have to fall. Or they could maybe reach for Larry Warfork, who's the Warfork. I don't know how to say his last name. He's the Kentucky guard, who's also a big athletic guy, but he's probably a later first-round guy. Either way, if they don't get those 2 offensive line spots, they're probably going defensive line, either a rusher or a tackle. And I think we've talked about, we're on the same page there too, is Sheldon Richardson. Richardson, I think the same way. Richardson, the kid out of Missouri.
Yeah, and he fell a little bit because he he ran over 5 at the combine.
He's a big guy. He's not supposed to be fast.
Well, he came back at his pro day and ran a 4.8.
Yeah, there you go.
So he's a really good player. He's a great under tackle prospect because he's a guy that gets through gaps, does well against one-on-one blocking. The knock on him is that he's maybe not great against double teams, but the wonderful thing about the Kiffin's 4-3 is that 3 technique never sees a double team.
Right. And if he's getting double teamed, it doesn't really matter if he's that great, as long as that frees up the 3 technique.
Oh, yeah. If you double team a 3 technique in that defense, that means Ware's almost got a free run, or you're putting a running back with Ware responsibilities, and if you do that, you might as well just sign your quarterback's death warrant.
Right. So we're okay with Richardson playing the 1 technique and not being very good in a double team situation. I mean, it doesn't impact that defense.
But our disagreement in the first round is I like DJ Fluker as a first round pick. Yes. You don't necessarily like him at 18.
I like him in the late first round.
Yeah.
And everybody always says trade down if the guys that you want are not there. If Cooper's not there, if Warmack's not there, if Richardson's not there, if Lane Johnson's not there, you trade down. Well, it's easy to say that, but you have to have a trading partner. And who's going to trade up to 18 from the mid-20s unless there's some guy? I mean, there's just not some guy that's going to be there at 18 that somebody's like, I got to have this guy now.
See, I think there could be. My problem with trading down this year, I think you trade down when you're the Cowboys of the mid-90s, or when you're the Patriots, or when you're the Steelers.
When you need when you
have a solid roster. You don't need immediate starters, and you can take guys and just add talent, just talent accrue. Or when you're Bill Parcells, when you first get to the Cowboys, and they're so bad that you just need guys that can play. So give me 8 guys that can play over where the Cowboys are at 8-8, where they have talent, horrible guy. Or in the case of the offensive line, horrible guy, talent. You need guys who can step in and play right now when you're first round. So that's why I'm okay with Fluker.
At 18.
Don't trade back. Get a guy that can play. He's better than Doug Free right now. I don't care if we paid him too much. I don't care if we reach. I want a guy that can play.
And I agree to the extent that I think that right guard and right tackle are easily their biggest weaknesses on the entire team.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I could justify taking Fluker. But I do think that's a little bit high for him. But I could justify it. So let's go to the second round. The guy that I'm hoping falls to them is Margus Hunt, the 6'8", 277-pound defensive end from SMU that ran a 4.6. He's got a great motor. I've seen some of his games. I've seen him in the Senior Bowl. Great motor. He does have a little bit of hip fluidity issues that make it harder for him to get around the athletic tackles. But he's a big guy, and he can get, he's made more plays than he hasn't. So I like him. I think he's borderline available at that spot. But that'd be the guy that I'd love to have. And if not him, since we're going, my first round pick was a guard. I'm still going on defense. If it's not him, I'm going to go with a defensive tackle. And I think we have a lot of defensive tackles to choose from that would be day one starters. Jesse Williams from Alabama would be a great one technique. I have Brandon Williams, a nose tackle from Missouri Southern. But he may be a third round value. I'm not 100% sure where he's. I think he's late second, so I don't know if you pass on him if one of the other guys isn't there. So those are the kind of guys I want to see as a defensive end or a defensive tackle in the second. Big guys, athletic, that can play the one technique from the tackle position or the strong side end.
Yeah, this won't make any sense coming from me. My dream pick, and I don't think it's a dream, I think he very well could be there and may be there in the third round, but I'd say reach for him here, is Barrett Jones, because he can play center and you need one. Mm-hmm. He can play guard and you need one, and in a pinch he can play tackle and you need one. So Barrett Jones, his value to me is he's good enough at all three positions. One, I think he could be your center for 10 years, which is what your plan would be. I don't know if he could be an all-pro guy, but he could be your center for 10 years. But he could play all three positions, so competition level immediately goes up. So Phil Costa's got to play for his job. Bernardo's got to play for his job. And this is if you don't grab a Cooper in the first round. And Doug Free, at very least, if you can tell me at the end of the year or at the end of training camp, I don't have to look at Doug Free, I'm happy.
I'm very high on Barrett Jones. He was an All-American center on one of the best lines in college football.
Yeah.
He was an All-American guard, and he was a second-team All-American or an All-SEC tackle. I mean, at all three positions, he's won some of the highest awards, and that speaks a lot from that line. I mean, that was one of the best lines we've ever seen in college football. So I'm really high on him, but I think for whatever reason his stock has dropped, and I think
we got a dislocated ankle.
I still think he's a top-notch player.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not going to impact who he's going to be on the field, I don't think. Unless it's a long-term lasting injury, but I haven't seen the medical report.
Yeah, he's not. I think his problem is he's not overly big and he's injured, so that's going to drop you down draft boards.
But I have seen him available in the third round, and that's why I didn't say anything about him here, because I think he is a third round pick.
I'm saying I would reach for him and not feel bad about it. If I was trying to be smart draft guy, I think I go Kawan Short as opposed to Marcus Hunt, because he gives you he had 14.5 tackles for a loss last season. Mm-hmm. Great under tackle, and I'm all about the under tackle in this defense.
And I like that pick. I think he's my number 2 inside guy besides Richardson, other than Lodolele and those guys that are going to be on. But
I think he's a better player than Hunt. Now Hunt may be a better player, may turn into a better player, but I think next year when it matters for you, I think he's a better player. And he gives you, I think he had like 4 block kicks.
Yes.
Last year, so he gives you some of the same things that
good
that
push
Hunt
up
gives
the middle
you.
on special teams. Yeah. Okay, so third round, I had Barrett Jones as a potential. I also think a couple of the other starting potential type moves. You could find a value tackle in the third round or a safety in the third round. I think those would meet starting need positions, and I think we've talked about. I think they could get 4 starters out of this draft.
Yeah.
So if you're still talking about starters in the third round, I think you could get a tackle. You could get Barrett Jones could play any of those line positions, or a safety. And I think it's a little more open, but I think I'm looking at those positions specifically and who's the best. There is a tackle. He's played at a small school, and I can't think of his name right now. It'll come to me in a second. But A lot of potential, but he went to a small school. Kind of like Eric Fisher.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about, but I don't have him down. My 2 tackles here were Kyle Long, Howie Long's son.
Mm-hmm.
Really good athlete, long guy, 6'7", from Oregon. And Dallas Thomas.
Dallas Thomas.
Yeah.
He went to Tennessee, so I don't know why I thought he went to a small school, but yeah, Dallas Thomas is the guy I was thinking of.
I think both of those guys beat Doug Free out because Doug Free can't play. My other third-round guy, Monty Ball from Wisconsin. I think you need a backup running back. I don't hate the pick there. It's not my favorite, but I think he could be usable.
And I think I went in the 4th round, running back, safety, or line again. I don't think you can go wrong with the linemen in this draft. 4th round running backs, I think there could be some value in Marcus Lattimore, Niall Davis out of Arkansas, 6 foot 227, ran a 4.4 740. I mean, he's a fast guy for a big guy. And again, line all day. You could draft the line.
Yeah, my 4th round back would be Joseph Randle because what the Cowboys need is more really fast, splashy guys.
Yeah, I'm on for that. I got one sleeper for you. I don't know if we can get into too many of the later rounds, 5th, 6th, 7th, but I do have one sleeper, and I read an article about this guy, started looking into him and thinking, could this be a guy that the Cowboys could use? And it's Peter Lalick. He is a quarterback out of California, Pennsylvania. He started for the Virginia Cavaliers, got into some partying issues, had to transfer, went to, I want to say, Oregon State, had some more partying issues, transferred again. And long story short, he has revived his career. He's back on the straight and narrow. He's 24 years old, so he's a little bit older coming out. But he's matured. He's demonstrated that. He's 6'4", 235 pounds, incredible rocket arm in the mold of a Flacco. And I know Flacco's not worth the $20 million. That's a whole other story. But he's got that kind of arm. And I think he's a guy that you could pull for a couple years to develop. And you could get him in the 6th, 7th, maybe undrafted free agent. So it's a guy that would be interesting to keep an eye on. Don't know if he has really what it takes to be an NFL guy, but I think it'd be worth
the risk,
a 6th, 7th, or undrafted signing.
Well, Rex and Troy Aikman always want to draft a quarterback, and we'll be back on the Strained Hammy podcast with Stars Talk next.
All right, we're back here on the Strained Hammy podcast. I'm Mark. We've got Travis and Rex here with us. The Stars have reached the midpoint of the shortened season. The record is 12-10-2, and they're just hanging on to their playoff hopes. They're just 2 points out of 3rd place due to having 2 games in hand against Detroit. So that just goes to show you how close the playoff race is. It's been a weird season, really, and not even talking about the short season. Just the makeup of the team is kind of odd. We got a couple old guys like Yager and Whitney, and then you've got young talent that they've been grooming. So it's been a really interesting season for me to watch. And the thing that's made it most interesting for me, I guess, has been the young talent. You know, guys like Brendan Dillon, Jamie Alexiak, Cody Eakin, and Antoine Roussel. And the older guys like Yager. I mean, Yager's been a complete success. I mean, he's leading the team with 18 points, 10 goals. But again, the younger
and
guys.
And he's 80 years old.
Yeah, he is.
That helps.
Yeah, I wish he was still rocking the mullet, but styles changed, I guess.
Well, and to your point of the young guys, I've thought this team needed to be rebuilding since Madonna left, and they never did bring in or put the young guys that they were drafting in the lineup. And this year we're seeing it. And they're only 2 points back from 3rd. So I think that's promising, and I like that that's where they're going.
Yeah.
That's kind of a rebuilding year. It's a short season, so it's probably the best season to do a rebuilding year.
Yeah.
We're getting the young guys in, and they actually have a shot at the playoffs, and I think that's very promising.
Yeah, and I think it sort of speaks to the job that Joe Newendike's been doing in his front office. I mean, they've drafted well, I think. And they've even, I think Brendan Dillon was a kind of an undrafted free agent kind of guy. That's been a real good pickup for them. Speaking of Brendan Dillon, I mean, I think he's been the most impressive youngster for me, just personally watching the team. He's real solid with the puck. He makes smart decisions, but he also is aggressive. That's something that Alexiak hasn't really shown me yet, is his aggressiveness. He's shown flashes of it since he's come back from being sent down. But Dylan definitely, he's been helping out on the attack. His aggressiveness also has played into some of his penalty trouble that he's had. He's leading the team in penalty minutes right now, but I think he's starting to figure that out as well. And then you've got the young forwards like Cody Eakin and Roussel.
Jamie Benn's another one of those young guys, and he joined the team late.
Mm-hmm.
We had the contract holdout situation,
Yeah.
and that was one of the things I think that kind of stunted the progression of the team. He's 23 years old, but he's considered one of the leaders on the team. And that being said, that he missed I think the first 10 games of the season or 12 games of the season, he's one of the top 4 scorers on the team. That just goes to show how good he is.
Yeah.
So you got Yager, as you already mentioned, with 18 points, and then you have Jamie Benn, Cody Eakin, and Louis Eriksson are the next top 3 scorers.
Mm-hmm.
And those are all young guys that you build around.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just on the front of the ice. And then you mentioned all the defensive guys, Dylan and the guy that I can't say his name because he's 6'7" and it's really hard to pronounce his name.
Big rig.
But I mean those are guys that you can build around this team, and that's why I was talking about the rebuilding team. So you got a lot of promising young players, but this season I still think they're a middle of the pack team, even though they're 2 points back from third place. They're also only 2 points back from 8th place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a tight pack, but I think they're very much a middle-of-the-pack team. I don't know if they have quite enough time in the season to really get things going and actually be a playoff team or a team that makes a splash in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So, the potential's there. I think next year is a different story. This year, I think, is all about the rebuild and getting these young guys acclimated to how to play. With Yager as a mentor, which is incredible to have. I just don't see it happening this year. And I could be totally wrong. I just don't see it this year.
Yeah, it's such a crapshoot right now. And the things that have been holding them back this year, namely, injuries, obviously everybody's dealing with injuries, but also their penalty problems. I think that has really kind of hindered their playoff chase. And they've been getting better on that front. They've taken less penalties. They're a little bit less aggressive on defense now, which it opens up more shots at Kari and the goalies. And to make that point, Kari Lettman's been save one or two games here and there. He's been absolutely fantastic. I mean,
easily one of the best goalies in the league, and I know a lot of people make a case for their goalie, but you can't argue with how dominant he's been. Just a day in, day out, he's been very consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, there's been a few games where he struggles, but give me a goalie who doesn't. But he's easily one of the top, we'll say, 5 goalies in the league, and that's something that you can easily be proud of, and something that you can say, hey, when we got a top goalie, we got to help him out.
Yeah.
And I think that's what these young defenders are here to do. And definitely Kari is a big part of any success that they're having this year. I mean, he is 9-4, and he's got 9 out of the 12 wins. But another key to that is the backups.
Yeah,
and Bachman, Richard Bachman, and Nilstorp.
Yeah.
They're 2 young guys. Well, Bachman's a little bit older, but he's still very young. And then Nilstorp is the youngest. I mean, he's just a kid. But these guys, they're your backups, and you rely on them. And in my experience with hockey is your backup goalies, you don't expect them to be all-stars and win every game. But you expect them to go about 500.
Yeah.
And that gets your starter a breather. That keeps you in the standings. And these guys are 3-6 right now, and they haven't been very good. And part of it is the penalties. I mean, the Stars aren't helping them out because we're getting in penalties, and our penalty kill is not very good this year. And that's something that is really going to kill you. But the goalie's got to do better.
Yeah.
And the backups, obviously specifically, if they were even 500 right now, I mean, you're talking about being in contention for the number 1 seed in the playoffs.
Yeah, maybe 3rd, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I mean, so better backup play would really make a big difference on where they're going right now.
Yeah. Also want to talk about Cody Eakin. The Stars got him from the Capitals when they sent away Mike Ribeiro. I think one word to describe his game is just pure energy. I mean, he's the guy who you play in a pickup basketball game who's always annoying the hell out of you, gets all the loose balls. I mean, Cody's the equivalent of that guy. He gets all the loose pucks.
He's a guy you look at and say, I got him.
Yeah.
And then he makes you look foolish.
Yeah. He's averaging 1.52 first assists per game. So he's the team leader in that aspect. He's got 15 points, 4 goals, 11 assists. So he's been really impressive. And then Antoine Roussel also. He's kind of played the instigator role that I was worried that they lost with Steve Ott. But he's not exactly filling that role the same way Ott does. But he's tricked some guys and taken some bad penalties that the Stars have been able to capitalize on. All right, so with that, we'll wrap up this week's edition of the Strained Hammy podcast. Make sure you're visiting strainedhammy.com for your DFW sports needs and follow us on Twitter at strainedhammy. Thanks for listening.
I know stuff because I watch television.
Do you watch the Backyardigans?